Hi, my name is Lynn Meyer. I'm a licensed professional counselor here in the state of Arizona, and I'm also a hard of hearing person. It wasn't until I was an adult and started studying psychology and mental health that I became aware of how my hearing loss has affected my overall well-being over the years. And now I like to do counseling with hard of hearing people to work on the general issues that we all struggle with, but also to learn how growing up or being hard of hearing as an adult affects that. See, when you have a hearing loss, it is a hidden disability. So people don't often know that they need to assist you because you don't inform of that. And even if you are comfortable doing that, they oftentimes don't know how they can help us communicate better. You can check on the Commission's website for a lot of resources on how to educate other people, how to communicate appropriately with a hard of hearing person, if that is yourself. Now, with growing up hard of hearing, you never quite fit in the hearing world because you can't always hear what's going on, and you never quite fit in the deaf community because you may not know sign language. So I kind of feel like I live on the fence between the two worlds. Fortunately, I do know sign language, and so that helps a little bit in that community. But as we know, society in itself is by and large a hearing community. There is that whole stigma of growing up with a disability that oftentimes as children and adults we internalize some of the negative stereotypes that we hear, which affects our self-esteem overall. There's definitely a struggle to participate in the hearing world in the fact that many environments are noisy, both in the work world and the social world. Large group settings where people are talking a lot, where there's a lot of external noise, public places like restaurants, it becomes so difficult to communicate that a hard hearing person just decides to not even go. They begin to isolate themselves from activities. For example, participating in sports can be difficult too, because you can't always hear what's going on. I know myself, I play racquetball, and on the court, don't ask me what the score is because I can't hear. So again, the struggle to participate in environments where a lot of people are talking leads people to just decide to stay home. Unfortunately, this isolation causes depression, and we have limited social relationships with other people. And as we know, having healthy relationships with other people contributes to longevity in life. So it is definitely not in one's best interest to isolate. Sometimes this isolation can lead people to become engaged in substance abuse. It's easier to stay home and have a drink of alcohol and feel good about oneself that way than to go out and socialize. There ends up, sometimes we go out and we end up bluffing our way through situations. For example, if I am in a group setting and I don't know what's being said and it's kind of embarrassing to keep asking somebody to repeat themselves, it's easier to just smile and nod and say, act like you know what's going on. Unfortunately, this doesn't work out in the long run because somebody may ask you something and you will be off topic, not what topic they were talking about. Or I myself find that I may ask a question and somebody already asked that question, but I wasn't aware of it because I acted like I knew what that person had said. So it is often healthy to be upfront and ask somebody to repeat themselves. This can be a double-edged sword though, because sometimes by the third time you ask somebody to repeat something, the common response they give is, never mind, it's not important anyway. And to a hard of hearing person, it basically says, you're not important enough to hear this. Another way that one's self-esteem is affected with a hearing loss is concern over how people perceive us. I know a lot of times with a hearing loss, I may be a little slow to respond. And the reason being is when you say something to me, I will be processing all at one time the context of the situation, your facial expressions, the diction that I heard at the time, to make sure that I fully understood what you said, and then I will respond. Some people may perceive that as me being slow, dumb, not sharp. So I know that has affected my self-esteem over time too. So this can create a lot of problems in the various environments, as I mentioned before. A main one is in any learning environment. I know when students are young, it can be very frustrating to be in a classroom where a student may be saying something and they're across the room. By the time that the other person looks to hear what they're saying and see what they're, kind of figure out what their facial expression are and read their lips, the person is done talking. We missed what the question was. And as an inability to participate in the classroom environment of discussions because you don't always know where the topic is. So a lot of times that student may just tune out in class because they get bored. It's also very frustrating if you have somebody, a teacher who's talking, and they turn to say something about the PowerPoint and they're not facing forward, so you can't read their lips. We often find that when I go to a conference, there will be questions from the audience, and inadvertently the speaker will not think to repeat the question to the rest of the audience so they can hear. So all of this effort that one has to put into listening all day can, like I said, the child in the classroom may tune out. I know myself, halfway through a day of a conference, I will be really drained from how much effort it takes to listen. In that school environment, it's tough for young people who are hard of hearing because they don't have real quality relationships. It's hard to fit in with the group banter that's going on. So children sometimes will also be ridiculed in school if they have assisted listening technology, so a lot of students will decline to even use that. In fact, you'll find that children who are in school in a deaf school actually have better quality relationships than children who are sometimes mainstream, because at least in the deaf school they have that whole peer relationship with people who communicate the same way they do, who understand hearing loss, who use assisted technology. Now, as we get into the work world as adults, we have additional struggles. First of all, in the interview process, we know we have a right to accommodations, but we often don't want to request them because there is discrimination. Employers oftentimes don't want to hire somebody with a disability because then they might have to provide accommodations. Once we are hired, we may be afraid to ask for accommodations lest they find a reason to terminate us because, maybe we're too much work to provide the accommodations. I know another way that affects one's self-esteem in the work world is feeling left out of the social work loop. A lot of information gets transmitted in a work environment quietly through whispers behind closed doors, and because a hard of hearing person can't always hear that, they don't always know that, gee, there might be a potential layoff happening or this person's been demoted, leaving one to feel left out of the loop. Interpersonal relationships are affected in terms of those with significant others. Say, when you date somebody, when do you tell them you have a hearing loss? We're always afraid of what they might think of that, how they might judge us. It causes difficulties with miscommunication in terms of, oh, I thought you said this. No, I said this, simply because we may have heard a word incorrectly. I always joke that it affects intimacy in terms of if somebody I'm involved with whispers sweet nothings in my ear, I can't hear them. They truly are sweet nothings. Having hearing loss causes difficulties if you are a parent. When your children are little, you have to worry about safety. You can't always hear what they're getting into as they're crawling around. As they get older, you may find that your children might use your hearing loss against you. I've had situations where my kids will say, oh yeah, I told you that, you just didn't hear me, as a way to get out of taking responsibility for something that they did. Sometimes it affects the quality of relationships between a parent and a child because the child just gets too frustrated repeating himself and just kind of gives up on the conversation. And to compound the conversation itself is younger children are not often clear with their diction, making it hard to hear them. Adolescents are infamous for mumbling as they talk, so that makes it even more difficult to communicate. As a hard of hearing person gets older, and even not with age, but oftentimes feel that lack of independence. We end up going, say, to a doctor's appointment and have somebody sort of be our ears, and then it often results in the doctor talking directly to the hearing person and kind of feeling like that hard of hearing person isn't even in the room. It definitely affects one's sense of independence and efficacy. So, as we reflect on this, though, I want you to think about that it's not all gloom and doom. As I've gotten older, I've learned to embrace my hearing loss, be okay with telling people about it, educating them on how they could help us communicate better, getting involved in advocacy efforts, and finding that community where you fit in with other people who understand what it's like to live with a hearing loss. You don't have to isolate and be depressed about it. So feel free to use all of the resources on the Commission's website, and if you do need referrals to a counselor, I know there is a resource page on the Commission's site for mental health providers. So I hope this was informative to you, and good luck on your journey.